Hello and welcome. This is World is One, a show that brings together some of the greatest political minds to share their ideas, discuss challenges, and present their fresh perspectives on some of the most pressing global issues. Today on our show, we have a man who grew up in the Korean War to become one of the most powerful international diplomats, His Excellency, Mr. Ban Ki-moon. Ban Ki-moon was born in South Korea and grew up during the Korean War. His family fled to the mountains as the war raged on. He calls himself a child of war and remembers the UN and other aid agencies helping his country during that time. It inspired him to become a diplomat. He entered the diplomatic service after university. His first posting was New Delhi. By 2004, he was South Korea's foreign minister. He became the 8th UN Secretary General, taking over from Kofi Annan in 2007, and remained at the top spot for 10 years. During his time at the helm, he created UN Women that focused on women's rights and gender equality. He is also passionate about fighting climate change and saw the Paris Agreement as one of his greatest achievements. But his tenure was not without criticism. Some have pointed to the lack of action in Syria as a serious failing of the United Nations. Others felt his style was too low-key and understated for the top UN job. Though he stepped down from his post at the UN, Ban Ki-moon still sees that he can contribute and wants to focus on the importance of thinking globally and the concept of global citizenship, because he says humanity is one family. Well, thank you for joining us. Now everyone knows you as the former UN Secretary General, but tell us a little bit about growing up during the Korean War. How did it shape you?
As you know, I have been calling myself a child of war. I was born, of course, before the end of Second World War, but when I was 6 years old, Korean War broke out. That whole changed my life. Not only me, but whole Korean people, including my parents and grandparents. So we had to flee our hometown. We have seen my hometown bombed in flame, and we lost all schools. United Nations came. In fact, India also sent very important life-saving humanitarian support teams. We are deeply grateful to Indian people, such a great humanitarian support at a time when many Korean people, including myself, needed life-saving support. That's why I'm calling myself a child of war. A child of war who was assisted and helped by the United Nations, later became the Secretary General of the United Nations. That's quite privileged, at the same time moving, and very much honored. I have been exerting all my efforts and time during the last 10 years as a Secretary General to do what I had been receiving exactly when I was meeting many refugee children. They said, look, the United Nations was with me at that time. Now it's time that United Nations will be with you. Don't despair. That has been my continuing message of hope.
What would you describe as the high point of your career as the UN Secretary General?
It's very hard to depict one or two, but if I may say maybe three. The first one, the moment when whole international community, 195 state parties, adopted unanimously the Paris Climate Agreement in December 2015, here in Paris. I cannot forget still the excitement and proud moment of all the delegations were cheering and encouraging themselves, embracing themselves. A second moment would be same year, September 2015, when whole member states of the United Nations adopted and presented their very ambitious, far-reaching vision called Sustainable Development Goals, with the 17 goals covering whole spectrums of human being, also planet Earth, including climate change. That was quite a moment when everybody was proud. The Pope Francis was also there, together with so many, more than 150 heads of state and government at the time. The third moment, in 2010, I established what is known as UN Women. This is a super agency dealing with gender equality. Until that moment, there was no such a department of agency dealing with promoting gender empowerment.
Wonderful. You pointed out one of your high points is getting that Paris Agreement. But of course, Donald Trump has decided to pull out of it. What is your reaction to that?
It's with the deepest disappointment and concern when I heard this message, this news, when US President Donald Trump announced that US would be pulling out of this Paris Agreement. It's just 1.5 years ago when the whole international community was united with a strong solidarity to save human beings and also to this planet Earth from deteriorating environmental degradation. I have two observations, first of all. This decision is short-sighted, misguided, and it does not stand on any scientific evidence nor economic assessment. Then another one is that while United States is now pulling back from this global pact agreement, then it has galvanized a strong march forward. Instead of pulling back, march forward. It has galvanized not only government, but also business groups and civil societies. They are marching on, regardless of what may happen. Of course, US, which is accounting for 14% of greenhouse gas emissions, is a huge number 2 countries, only next to China. It has also largest resources, financial resources, and they have to pay and help many developing countries. It will be a huge blow politically, psychologically to international community. But at the same time, I am very much encouraged to be in Paris now, working with many world leaders, particularly European leaders, including President Macron of France, who have unequivocally stated out that this is a wrong decision and that they are moving on in accordance with the Paris Agreement. I think this global pact toward the environment, which we'll adopt in Paris, will be a great sign of solidarity and unity.
Well, as the former Secretary General, I'm sure you've met many world leaders. Have you met Prime Minister Narendra Modi?
I have met him so many times. I even visited his hometown, Gujarat, when he hosted a very important summit meeting on environment. And I really wanted to be with him and support his leadership. And in fact, Prime Minister Modi, not only he has been popular in his own country, but he has been also spearheading this campaign to save this planet Earth and human beings from environmental degradation by initiating many important domestic and global initiatives. He spearheaded what we call International Solar Alliance, where 122 countries are participating. With the help of European Union, particularly United States and also France, is hugely ambitious, and they are now making sure that their greenhouse gas emissions will be reduced through their nationally targeted, determined contribution, reducing at least 33 to 35% against the level of 2005. I hope, but despite what is happening now in some parts of the world, particularly the United States, Indian government and Prime Minister Modi will really lead this campaign, global campaign, to make sure that Paris Agreement will be fully implemented. Yeah.
When you were the UN Secretary General, did you ever come under pressure by powerful members?
That's quite a sensitive question. The fact of our reality, our real world, there were some occasions when a certain number of countries, I would not name those member states, who brought some national interest perspectives to the United Nations. United Nations is the place where we discuss all national issues and making it a global perspective. That's the beauty and the importance of United Nations. But sometimes certain countries, they have been insisting that only their national interests should be reflected in a global perspective. That is not fair, and that is not the constructive one. But I have been standing tall and firm whenever I have been facing with that kind of pressure, political pressure. First of all, it was unfair, it was unethical, in accordance with the UN principles of the Charter. Then finally, they would either withdraw, or their perspectives have been sometimes reflected as an overall, comprehensive, global framework. I think that is okay, but I sincerely hope that the leaders of member states should come global perspectives. Yeah.
And because of that, the pressures from powerful members, do you think the UN needs reform? It's 70 years old, and it's changed a lot. The world has changed in 70 years.
I should agree to your questions. The UN should change much, much more. As a Secretary General, during my term, 10 years, I have been exerting all my efforts to make United Nations more transparent, accountable, and more workable, and more forward-looking, so that the United Nations can be the symbol of hope, working for many defenseless people and voiceless people. But fact of life is that despite the transformative development of technology, communication and information, United Nations agencies have not been able to cope in terms of speed of adapting itself to changing world. That's why United Nations reform has always been the #1 priority, and including my 7 predecessors, and also my successor, Antonio Guterres, and myself. I'm sure that this will have to be a priority issues to make sure that UN is more representative, UN is more accountable and transparent, and UN can deliver much more.
What would you say the biggest weaknesses in the UN are?
I would say there are some weaknesses points, but decision-making process is not up to the standard or up to what we see the changing world. For example, we have a charter provision of veto power in the Security Council. Security Council is the most responsible organization for the peace and security of the world. They have to be able to immediately, efficiently, and effectively address all these issues. But this is a very unique way of decision-making process. Then away from this Security Council, when it is a charter provision, I'm not able to say anything about amendment of the charter, but when it comes to a General Assembly, in normal proceedings of the United Nations, they also favor or try to agree on anything on a consensus basis. Literally speaking, the consensus should not block the decision makings, and it should not always be unanimity, but sometimes some countries really insist on unanimity. Then when we have 193 member states, it's very difficult to have a decision. So that means when United Nations takes time in making decisions, it will be the people around the world who urgently need our support may not get such a support.
Well, you brought up the Security Council. Now, is Security Council reform feasible or even practical?
I think there is a widely shared feeling and almost a consensus feeling that Security Council should be changed, adapting to changing situation in a more representative, democratic, more transparent and accountable way. That's all what I want to see happen. In practical terms, whether it is viable or not, I think it should be viable. If permanent members of the Security Council, 5 members, are united, that they are for the changes of the United Nations Security Council, I think it is possible. But this has been discussed during the last 25 years, but without making any progress, unfortunately.
India has long wanted to be a part of the Security Council. Do you think that would be in all likelihood ever to happen?
I am aware, fully aware, the aspiration shared among Indian government and people that India would like to contribute more and proper as one of the very important member states of the United Nations for maintaining peace and security, not only in the region but globally. That's what India has been playing a very important role by providing many soldiers, men and women to conflict areas, by providing many humanitarian supports to the people who need, while they also sometimes have natural disasters. It's quite a generous and compassionate leadership. There is widely shared views among the member states that countries like India should better be able to contribute better and more. But that, again, is a part of a Security Council reform. Yeah.
Do you think we'll see India on the Security Council anytime soon?
Time will come soon, rather than late, when UN should be ready and better prepared institutionally to cope with many challenges.
Now, speaking of challenges, the UN was heavily criticized about the war in Syria and not taking action. Do you feel that the UN, in this case, failed the people of Syria?
Whenever there are some crises and conflicts, long-standing conflicts, UN has been blamed and criticized. I don't think it's not fair, but at the same time, one should also look into carefully and more deeply why it has been so. In case of the Syrian war, it has been continuing longer than 6 years. During that time, while fighting was going on, more than 5 million people have become refugees, and more than maybe 500,000 people have been killed now. Most of the infrastructures have been destroyed. This is a terrible and tragic situation. But because of the disunity, division of political issues, there are at least three divisions. The Syrian people, they are divided into largely two, pro-Assad and anti-Assad. Then secondly, the regional powers in the Middle East, they are divided. You know what is now happening among their conflicts among themselves. This has not helped Syrian crisis. And then the Security Council, in a broader sense, United Nations, has not been united. They have been divided. Even for humanitarian support, we have seen several veto powers exercised. This has helped, this has really made the significant deteriorating situations in terms of United Nations' ability to address this issue. I have nominated the three most distinguished and able diplomats. The first, my predecessor Kofi Annan as a special envoy, then one of the most able, capable diplomats, Lakhdar Brahimi, then now Staffan de Mistura. Three envoys have been fully, extensively, deeply engaged in the negotiations. Now, these negotiations are still going on. I sincerely hope that now the regional powers and global powers who are involved in this process should really address this issue with a sense of unity and solidarity for the people, not only for Syrians, but for the region. And we have to show some good example that United Nations can resolve this kind of long-standing conflicts.
Now, do you believe the UN should take a more peacekeeping role in other countries, like Afghanistan?
There is a peace to keep. This is a peacekeeping mission, keeping two conflicting sides at bay through the deploying UN peacekeeping mission. It's not the peace enforcing mission. When it becomes to enforce peace, like we have seen in Iraq and Afghanistan, then it has been, they have been creating a sort of a coalition forces. Those countries who are willing to contribute their forces to help enforce the peace. Now, it's not the ripe or environment, politically sustainable to think about the UN peacekeeping missions in Afghanistan. It's largely done by coalition forces led by United States and some other European countries. It requires a huge amount of resources, including assets. We have seen a lot of sacrifices in Iraq and in Afghanistan. So United Nations has been very cautious about that kind of situation. Yeah.
Now, before you were the Secretary General, you were a diplomat and were posted in New Delhi. Can you tell me a bit about how did you find your posting?
Looking back, 45 years, when I was just a young career diplomat, working in India, learning more about the regional situations, and learning more about the Indian way of diplomacy. India has produced many distinguished diplomats, and India has been playing a leading country in non-aligned movement, and they have been a very active member state of the United Nations, and India has shown some model roles in diplomacy. I was fortunate to spend 3 years in India trying to learn more how a diplomat should, work together with other member states. Now, rising the ladder in a diplomatic career, I have been also working very closely with Indian diplomats, Indian politicians, like Prime Minister Modi, then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, and many foreign ministers and diplomats. So all in all, I have a very good experience and memory. This is a personal story. When I was there, I had my son born in India. Then after many years, I had my son-in-law, an Indian man, who married to my daughter. So I have a lot of Indian connection. All in all, I have a very good attachment and love for Indian culture. This India also is origin of our civilization and culture. Yeah.
What does the future hold for you? There's some speculation that a presidency in South Korea might be in the future.
Well, it is over already. We have a new president. I have dropped this ambition already. Now, as a former Secretary General of the United Nations, I think I have more things to do, more constructive, future-oriented works to do. I will try my best to foster a global citizenship, a global vision among young people who would soon be taking over their leadership role in their respective societies. And it's very important that we work as global citizens. Now, while we may carry all different national passports, all different nationalities, but in this tightly interconnected world, therefore we should not mind much about our national territories, national citizenship. We have to work for global citizens. This is my vision, and I'm going to foster this global citizenship to many young people as a former Secretary General. And I will be working as a chair of Ban Ki-moon Center for Sustainable Development. And also I'm also planning to establish a Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens. So those are the areas in which I will devote my time and energy.
Finally, there has been a wave of kind of isolationism, populism. Presidency of Donald Trump was all about making America great, being isolated from the world. We saw the Brexit vote, pulling away from Europe. How do you fight that instinct then when people want to pull away from an interconnected world?
Again, we are living in a very small world. We are all members of a small global family. I am deeply concerned about this trend of short-sighted national perspectives. Instead of building bridges, erecting walls against other people, that's totally not acceptable, unacceptable in this 21st century. I am deeply concerned about this nationalism or isolationism and just trying to protect their own people. There's no difference between the regions or between and among the countries. We are one family now. I have been urging world leaders to foster global citizenship, global vision. Those leaders who would not have global vision cannot be regarded as a global leader. We need global leadership now. That's what the United Nations is aspiring for and trying to achieve.
Your Excellency, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It has been a great pleasure.